Now it's time for our opening plenary, Our Voice, Nuestro Poder. It has been and continues to be a challenging year. The Latino population, especially those among us who are the most essential workers and some who are undocumented, have been hit hardest by the global pandemic. Add to that the widespread demonstrations in response to some horrifying acts of violence and subsequent calls for racial and social justice. We are in an unprecedented time. As a result of what we have collectively experienced, our nation and the world is changing, but the direction it will take is not yet clear. But if there's one thing that has been made abundantly clear, it is this: there are not enough of us at the table, and our community's needs and concerns are not being sufficiently addressed. So it is on us to raise our voices, to exercise our power, to fight for the support we should already have, and to ensure both a stronger and more representative nation. Over the next couple of months, we'll have some opportunities to show up and make our presence known. But we have to meet this moment, and we may need to overcome barriers that prevent us from participating fully in civic life. Today's plenary speakers will share insights on the potential of this moment and what we need to do to ensure that the Latino community's voice is heard and our poder is felt. But before we jump into that dialogue, I'd like to thank the sponsors of this plenary, Facebook and MasterCard. Please welcome Soraya Tapia Hadley, Manager of Public Policy at Facebook and CHCI Advisory Council member, for brief remarks.
Good morning, and welcome to CHCI's 2020 Leadership Conference, Our Voice, Nuestro Poder. My name is Soraya Tapia Hadley. I'm Manager of Public Policy at Facebook, and it's an honor to be here with you. Thank you so much to Marco Davis, to Congressman Ruben Gallego, and to the entire CHCI organization for your dedication, your leadership, your talent. In the midst of the pandemic, you have planned and executed this exceptional conference. So thank you. And thank you to our CHCI supporters. At Facebook, we're very privileged. Latinos overwhelmingly use our family of apps to stay connected to friends and loved ones, both near and far, to find information, and to find clients and customers. If you're a small business looking for free tools and resources and training, you can access our Small Business Support Center. There are currently 180 million businesses using our family of apps. We're also wanting to make sure that everyone is safe online. So you can go to Facebook's Safety Center and learn about reporting and other safety tools and tips. The idea is to give people the power to build community and bring the world closer together. Over 1 billion stories and 100 billion messages are shared across our family of apps each day. With the upcoming election, we're committed to making sure people have a voice, but also to ensure that our community has the right information when it comes to voting. And that's why we recently launched the Voting Information Center. Together with registration efforts, the goal is simple: to help every eligible voter in the U.S. vote this year. The Voting Information Center will have announcements from local election authorities, as well as information on how to vote, when to vote, where to vote, polling places, information on mail-in ballots, absentee voting, early voting, and information for overseas and military personnel and voters. It will also provide information and links to help people plan their vote on Election Day. Additionally, we won't accept any new political ads in the week up before the election. We'll remove any posts that claim that you will get COVID-19 if you go vote, and link to accurate coronavirus information. We'll attach a label to any posts that try to delegitimize the election or question legitimacy of a voting method. If any candidate or campaign tries to declare victory before the final results are in, we'll add a label to their post directing people to the official results at Reuters and the National Election Pool. Our voice truly is our vote, our power. So make sure you have a plan, and el poder está en tus manos. Gracias. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to introduce a colleague and a friend, a Latino leader who has been a member of Congress since 2014, representing the 7th District of Arizona. Congressman Ruben Gallego is the son of Hispanic immigrants and a veteran who served in Iraq with the United States Marine Corps.
Thank you, Marco. Greetings, everyone. On behalf of CHCI, I want to welcome you to CHCI's 2020 Leadership Conference. I want to thank Marco and the staff, my fellow board members, and our advisory council. as well as the sponsors and everyone associated with CHCI for the hard work that has gone into convening our leadership conference in this unique virtual setting. As the chairman of CHCI, I'm particularly pleased you have set aside time to be with us over the next several days, and I look forward to your participation at our 43rd Annual Awards Gala on Monday, September 21st. I hope you will take full advantage of the conference sessions and discussions, and there's still time to invite your colleagues to register and participate. It is appropriate that we begin our leadership conference with a session titled Our Voice, Nuestro Poder. Our population can make a significant impact by exercising our voice and demonstrating our power. The census is one of the most important ways to exercise our voice, and is particularly important for our Hispanic community. Many different organizations and groups are doing what they can to make sure that everyone understands the importance of the census and to ensure the greatest possible participation from our community and everyone who lives in the country. In our opening plenary, we'll hear from our distinguished panel featuring Nelly Gorbea, the Secretary of State for Rhode Island, and Alex Padilla, Secretary of State for California. They'll discuss how to increase civic participation in the Latino community this year and address voter suppression and election security. I'm excited about all our speakers, topics, and new special experiences, like the pitch competition and career fair that we'll be offering during our virtual conference. We have a lot to talk about. I'm glad you came to join us. Thank you and enjoy the conference.
Good afternoon, everyone. Buenas tardes, and thank you for joining us for this virtual conference. Thank you, Congressman Gallego, Soraya, and Marco for getting us all started. I'm delighted to be with you here today and kick off the very first plenary of this year's CHCI Leadership Conference. But first, I want to give a special shout out to the many parents who are joining us today, and that we know you're dealing with your children's virtual school experience. So all of our love, lots of patience to you. You're going to get through it. But before we get started, I wanted to remind you all of our hashtag CHCIHHM20. Again, that is CHCIHHM20. Again, this is a pivotal part of our program will be you, the audience. And I'm sure you will have many questions, as I do. And so you will be able to submit those. Look now at your screen via the Q&A box that you're seeing on your screen right now. As Congressman Gallego and Marco said, this is a pivotal time in our country, and I think it's really important that our discussion today, at the very first discussion plenary, is titled Our Voice, Nuestro Poder. Latinos continue to be underrepresented in every sector, basically, in the leadership roles in this country. And despite that we are the fastest growing and youngest demographic in our society, we know that we can have an impact by exercising our voice and demonstrating nuestro poder by ensuring accurate representation through the census. And in just a few weeks, just a few short weeks, by showing up at the polls for the 2020 elections. And not only it's the presidential election, we know that it's local and state also. During the session, we want to discuss how to increase civic participation in the Latino community and address the challenges that we're facing, such as voter suppression and election security. We know that there is a very dangerous narrative that is being put out there. And, that puts in question, will people, want to participate or not if they feel that their vote is not going to be counted. But we're going to discuss all of that with our panelists, and they are a wonderful group of people. I want to begin with Honorable Alex Padilla, the Secretary of State of California, the first Latino elected to that position, and has made it a mission to not only modernize the office, but protect and expand voting rights. We're very pleased to be joined by the Honorable Eli Gorbea, Secretary of State of Rhode Island, who since 2017 has been actively working to improve Rhode Island's elections infrastructure, actually positioning the state as a leader in elections cybersecurity. Mercedes Garcia, Vice President of Community Relations at MasterCard. She's played a key role, I would say pivotal, in developing financial education programs for Latinos, African Americans, and other underserved groups. And we're also pleased to have with us Vanita Gupta, President and CEO of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights. And she has also served as acting Assistant Attorney General and head of the U.S. Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. So welcome to all of you. Thank you for spending some time with us. We know you have a very busy schedule. So I want to just start off immediately by asking you all this first question. What does representation look like within the context of civic participation across the diverse Latino community? And please define, what do you believe representation means? In other words, in your personal experience. And let's go ahead. I'm going to start with Alex. Alex, you're in the minority, so I'm going to let you have the first word, because I don't know if these ladies are going to let you speak later on. So go right ahead. The floor is yours.
No, I'm honored to be on stage alongside these powerful women leaders, period, for this important conversation. So thank you, Lori. It's every September, I'm typically on tour with high schools across the country, talking to young people about the importance of registering to vote and the importance of voting in every election when they turn 18. And part of my pitch is kind of reminding them what we all supposedly learned in high school government class, which is our democracy works best when as many eligible people participate, right? We should be striving for an electorate that represents the beautiful, powerful diversity of our nation. But the sad reality is it doesn't. And so Secretary Gorbea and I and so many others are in the business of what can we do to facilitate not just voter registration, but the actual act of voting for so many eligible citizens that may be eligible but not registered yet, may be registered and be very infrequent voters as opposed to very regular voters, as we strive for that more inclusive democracy that is at the core of our nation. So, to me, I think that's how we define it, and it all falls from there. What are the policies, what are the initiatives, outreach and otherwise, that we can do to increase those registration rates, increase those turnout rates? And sadly, that's too much of a debate in the year 2020.
Nelly, go right ahead. Jump in there.
No, yes, thank you again. And thanks to CHCI, because this is a wonderful opportunity to have a really important discussion in these times. And it's an honor to be with these panelists, and particularly with my good brother, Secretary Padilla, who has been an outstanding mentor to me as we both navigate these waters. I'm proud to say that Rhode Island is a little bit of what people should look at when they think about diversity and representation. We're a small state, but in the past couple of decades, we've gotten up to 6 different countries of origin represented within our Latino electeds. There's over a few dozen of them, and thanks to the primary last week, we had a few more that hopefully are going to join those ranks. And it's also a group of Latino electeds that represents, actually, where more than half of them are actually Latinas. So to me, that's diversity. That is, there's no one group that's dominating the whole conversation. It's that there are many different voices. Our best public policy solutions come when there's a diversity of opinions, perspectives, and backgrounds around the policymaking table.
Mercedes?
I would just say that this is such an important topic, and you would imagine why somebody from MasterCard is sitting here. Is she going to sell us credit cards or what? No, MasterCard is not a credit card company. But I'm just going to share my thoughts from a totally different perspective, which I think is very relevant here, which is financial inclusion, empowerment, equity. And I'm a firm believer working so many years in financial education, that's a key point that we cannot oversee, that we need to pay attention to as well, and make sure that we are empowering, especially underserved communities, with the education and the knowledge that they need to claim their place, to understand that they have a voice and they have the right to have a voice. So a little different perspective, but very, very excited and honored to be here with this amazing group.
So Vanita, what does representation look like to you?
Well, I'll associate myself with my esteemed panelists' comments, because I agree with all of them. But I think ultimately representation is about our power our voice, resources for our communities. All of this is determined by whether or not we have representation, whether we are represented, and the ways in which we achieve representation in our democracy is through the census, it's through voting, it's through feeling civically engaged in all of the ways people were protesting this summer. People have been working on local, state, and federal campaigns. And so there's a lot of different ways that people show up for our democracy to have representation and voice. But ultimately, I think it's so important because our power, our resources, our voice really is a reflection of how well we are or aren't represented at all levels of government and in our communities.
But I want to challenge all of you to, and do want to get to the topic of the census, but I want to challenge all of you to this. I'm hearing you all say that the way that we are represented is through our voice, through our vote, through the census, etc. And over the last decade, we've all been doing that. This community has been doing that, but yet we're underrepresented everywhere. And listen, I just want to throw this out. Our purchase power is already in the trillions. So what's wrong? Why is it that we're not sitting at the table? Why is it that we're still invisible, rare breeds in certain sectors? We're not in the boardrooms. What is going on? What has gone wrong, Vanita?
Well, I think sometimes we confuse changing demographics with power. And I think your point is so important, right? People are always talking about how, by 2050, the United States will be majority minority. And there's no question that the Latino community's power and reach in terms of, the demographic representation is only growing. And yet we also know that in this country that power doesn't always follow demographics, and that we have to be able in this country to create the tables when we are not invited to the table, and that we have to be able, it's not just through civic participation, which I think is key, voting, census, and all of the like, but it's the kind of thing that Mercedes is talking about in terms of equity in the boardrooms and running for office. And basically, the kinds of things that our secretaries of states are showing that are on this panel. They didn't wait to be invited to run for Secretary of State, although maybe both of you were, and you can let us know. But they actually saw the opportunity and said, you know what, this is how I am going to have voice in how my elections are run, in how the state of Rhode Island and how the state of California respects Latino elected officials. And they are also, through their own leadership, creating space for other Latino leaders, other leaders of color. I know I work very closely with Secretary Padilla, who I consider a great friend, and with Secretary Gorbea on a whole bunch of different issues. And by their example and their courage and their, taking these risks to create their tables, are bringing others with them. And that's how it takes all of this to create power, because, it isn't too often for communities of color. We aren't just kind of given this pathway. We create our pathways into power.
So Nelly,
if I can
go right ahead.
Yeah.
She made a very important point. She said that she didn't know if you and Nelly had been invited to run for Secretary of State. And that's one of the key issues, I think, isn't it? That, our political parties sometimes are not really, supportive of minority candidates. We've heard this complaint before. I don't know. Well, is that one of the cases? Is that what is happening?
Well, it is part. Yeah, I know part of it. So I was the candidate that was not supposed to win in 2014 in the statewide elected races. My opponent in the Democratic primary, who had the endorsement of the Speaker of the House, of the party, of all the unions. But I knew that I was the better candidate for Rhode Island, and I was able to work really, really hard to make that point across. And in the end, what's really great, and I can tell people here and across the country, is your vote really matters. So the most common thing that I got told right after I won my primary, which, again, nobody thought I could win, was, wow, Nelly, congratulations. I voted for you. I didn't think you were going to win. And the first 5 times they tell you that, it's really funny. But then after that, you're like, wow, a lot of people did it. But they voted. And that is the key thing. voting seems very solitary and inconsequential, particularly in the context of a presidential election. And yet it is an incredibly important thing because it's that accumulation of votes that changes history. When I got elected, I was the first Hispanic in all of New England elected at a statewide level. That wouldn't have happened if every one of those people who thought, oh, she's great, but I have other things to do, or I'm not going to vote down ballot. No, but they voted, and that's what changes things.
Alex, go right ahead, please.
So, I wasn't invited to run for Secretary of State either, but I sort of insisted on my candidacy and brought years of experience and frankly organizing to that campaign to make it victorious. But what I wanted to offer is kind of piggybacking on what Vanita said, right? The change we want to see at leadership tables, both in the public and in the private sector, and frankly across the board. At that foundation is, I believe, civic engagement, and I offer California as a case study. Right, people look at California today. Oh, big blue California, the land of the resistance, et cetera, et cetera. It wasn't always the case. If we go back 25 years ago, California was still rattled by the passage of Proposition 187. Yes, in the Golden State, voters approved a measure that sought to deny public services to immigrant families and would have required all school personnel to report to the authorities anybody they suspected of being undocumented in the state of California. I mean, that seems like unimaginable in California for 2020. That's because our state has come a long way. Why? Because in response to that measure and the scapegoating of Latinos and immigrants, you had a whole wave of people like my parents who were immigrants to this country with no urgency of becoming citizens, finally realizing they needed to do so they could register and they could vote. And you had a whole generation of young people, myself included, who up until that point were pretty cynical about government and politics, realizing that if we wanted to change things, we need to engage, not hide. And so we did. And that's why you have the political climate in California that you have today, a political climate that will unabashedly pass laws, for example, that requires diversity on corporate boards for California-based corporations. As just one example, you have on the ballot this fall a measure that would repeal the affirmative action ban in California that was passed in the wake of Proposition 187. So through civic engagement, we can strengthen our representation, not just as voters, but as office holders. And once we are in those important federal, state, and local positions, then you can set the stage for much better and inclusive public policy and a much more inclusive and representative economy.
So it sounds like you're all saying, yes, we need to vote, but also when people get into certain positions, they need to continue to advocate to bring other minorities, other women, other Latinos, African Americans to the plate. It just doesn't stop with you getting elected. Mercedes, I'm interested in hearing what are your views looking at this from the corporate world?
Well, from the corporate world, I think there is a great opportunity to partner and to do our part as well. In the case of MasterCard, as you probably have heard, we're very big promoters of financial inclusion, and especially what I do, the education program that I manage, financial literacy as well. And I think that plays a very, very important part because, as they were saying, we're not going to sit down and wait to be invited. We had to get ready, get prepared, and I know there's a lot of young people attending this great conference. We need to pay attention to that. And I know that there's many other companies like MasterCard as well that are taking this seriously, that we're really working with the community. We're there because you need to get prepared. You need to get educated. I think one of the things as a Latina as well, sometimes we are like scared or we don't know. We are a little bit like, this is too complicated. I don't understand. And no, I think we have to stand up and really get prepared, get educated, find all the alternatives and all the tools that are out there, because they are there. Sometimes we don't take the time to look for them. So it's about getting prepared and being ready, because when that little door open, we just jump in and say, okay, I'm here, I'm qualified, I have everything needed, I have the passion and have all the values that us like Latinos bring. So we have to be ready. So that's how we, we help on that.
I want to go back to the census. Listen, we all know what's going on, and there's a lot of fears that the Latino community is going to be undercounted. And we know that there's grave consequences that come with that undercount. Has everything been done? Have we as Latinos done everything that we can do to make sure that we are counted? It doesn't matter where we live, what state we're in, what region we're in. And if we haven't done everything, then and the census comes to pass and the numbers are tabulated and we are undercounted, is there something that we can do to counterbalance the impact of not having every one of us being counted? Mr. Padilla.
Well, no, there's still time. So we haven't done everything that we can do. We have at least another 2.5 weeks before the end of the month, which is as of this point, the deadline to respond to the census. Ongoing litigation, as you probably all know, it's going to be heard on the 17th to try to restore October 31st as the deadline to respond. In California, for example, we have about 68% of households that have responded to the census, a little bit above the national average, but nearly 1/3 of California households, including a lot of Latino households, that have not. So we still have a tremendous amount of work to do, both before the response deadline and then in the aftermath when there's all the number crunching, trying to adjust the numbers and get to as close to 100% as possible. It's a shame that this administration has attacked the census from day one, from underfunding and understaffing, the threat of the citizenship question, and now the accelerated deadlines. And I believe it's very intentional because we know who those hard to count communities are. It is disproportionately communities of color, young people, and lower income communities. So we have to overcome that with our innovative efforts under COVID. Phone banking, text banking, caravans, whatever we need to do to continue to press the message. Got to participate in the census.
So, Vanita, what happens? What happens if we are undercounted? How do we counterbalance that? What can we do to address that undercount?
Well, right now I want to underscore what Secretary Padilla said, which is if you haven't already and you are on this, go to 2020census.gov and fill it out, but then also get your friends and family to fill it out. Unfortunately, the Trump administration is cutting back the period of time that we have to do a count. And so it does look like the end of September, barring anything else, is going to be the date. But let me explain a couple of things. We are going to do everything we can to get Congress to extend the deadlines for giving all of the data over to the states for redistricting and for apportionment purposes. And we're going to work with Congress to try to extend the census count. There's ongoing litigation, as Secretary Padilla said, that is also seeking to do the same. But whenever the census count ends, whether it's at the end of September or at the end of October, the Census Bureau takes all of the data that was collected and does this thing called imputation and looks at administrative records to make up for the gap that exists. The concern right now is that the gap may be so massive among communities of color. We all know that the hardest to count communities are communities of color, young children, people experiencing homelessness. But there's been a lot of fear among immigrant and U.S. citizen communities alike. And we are concerned about the level of an undercount that could exist. But the Bureau spends and needs typically around 4 months to be able to do all of the data accuracy checking that they are going to do. And then there's a real question about whether they are able to get reliable enough data that the data can then be sent off for apportionment purposes and for state redistricting. And I will say right now, that's an open question. We have never had to do a census redo. That is not what we are hoping for. The taxpayers have invested close to $20 billion in getting the 2020 census right. So that's why these next weeks are crucial. The leadership conference through our Consensus Counts campaign is working with businesses, with secretaries of states, with state and local officials, with all kinds of people all over the country, state organizations that are helping to work to do the phone banking, to do the texting, to do the outreach, because obviously, as Secretary Padilla said, COVID has really hit the organizing efforts hard. But this is an all hands on deck effort. And so there's that policy advocacy, there's the counting. We will be working very closely with the Bureau and data scientists to evaluate the data. And so we've got to keep hope, but we need a lot of action and all hands on deck right now.
So Nellie, it sounds like it's not all lost. There are some mechanisms, to fix any type of undercount. What do you need us as a community to do? What do you need the thousands of hundreds of CHCI fellows that are watching and people who are watching us right now to do?
I need you to do what I do, which is whenever I'm in the grocery store, whenever I'm walking at a distance with my mask and everything, I still have a conversation about the census with my family, with my neighbors, with my friends. That is something you can absolutely do. And then if they don't know, particularly our younger people, you can just bring it up on your phone and help them fill it out. I did this the other day with a young guy, Hispanic guy over at the AT&T store that, I happened to go in for some business. We got to talking, you're waiting around, you're like, hey, have you filled out your census, kind of thing. And he had it. And while we were waiting for stuff to happen, we filled out his census. And he said he committed, to asking his friends and his roommate. And so that's how we're going to get it done, unfortunately. Mano de obra a pulmón.
A pulmón, así es.
Sometimes it takes like one person at a time, right? Sometimes we might think, I'm just going to be talking to one person. But I am a true believer that even one at a time, it has a ripple effect. And once somebody gets the confidence to do it and tells the neighbor, and you know how we Latinos are, sometimes we get things more from our compadre, from our neighbor, and people that make us feel comfortable and trust. So that's sometimes what it takes, right?
So
imagine if all these young people suddenly took their social media, accounts, their Instagram accounts, their, I know not, and all these other, social media, their Facebook accounts for, their parents, they took them over. And suddenly you had, this whole conversation about, have you done the census? Have you done it? Have you done it? Have you done it? We have, the benefit right now is that we have the social media tools to do this with, but we have to be active.
In other words,
and if I could
leave our comfort zone. Go ahead, Vanita.
I just wanted to uplift a couple of key organizations too that are doing a lot of work. MALDEF, the Mexican American Legal Defense and Education Fund, is involved in litigation around the country. NALEO Educational Fund is our core partner. They're a co-chair of our census task force and are running a massive nationwide get out the count effort. So for any of you that are looking to get even more involved, reach out to these organizations, support them. But this is a challenging time, and yet the results of the census are going to last us longer than any election for the next decade. And so we really need everyone to get involved.
Yeah, actually, Secretary Padilla and I have both been involved with NALEO, and one of the really great things is all the actual tools that you have, even just for the messaging. So you don't know what to say, you can go on their website and get actual snippets of social media messaging that you can use to send it to your own family and friends.
So
copy and paste the graphics. They're great.
Yeah, I'm gonna jump in here real quick and remind the audience to please submit your questions to that chat tab, that Q&A tab that you see there on your screen. Just one last thing regarding to the census, and I do want to get on to the security and elections because that's a really important topic. But if people are unsure about their information with regards to the census, is there a way for them to see their census status? Is there any way for them to get comfort that their information is not being shared?
Well, the personal information submitted through the census by federal law is protected and confidential, cannot be shared with other departments, other agencies for any other purpose. So again, the personal information is kept within the Bureau. It's only the statistical information that helps inform both public policy, reapportionment, redistricting, and of course, federal funding.
Bonita, I think you were going to add something.
It's exactly what Secretary Pia said. Federal law is very robust on this topic.
And I'll give you a funny
Bonita.
story. As an election official, one of the things that the census does is at the very beginning, they were trying to get new streets in our state so that they could include them in their data bank. And I'm like, oh, this is great. You're asking cities and towns for all this information. I have the voter list that I need to add those into. Could we share information? And they said, yep, no, we can't. I mean, even to another elected official. So, and that's just street addresses. You can imagine there's a really tight security. Así que no le tengan miedo. We have to do this. Nos tenemos que hacer contar.
And it sounded like a very obvious question, and I know that, but I think people, need to hear things over and over again because, again, we've heard so many different narratives and so much, information that is misleading that I think it's always sometimes worth repeating something that may be very 101. Going on to election security. Listen, we're talking to people in the street, and they're just people who are saying, yo no voy a votar por correo. Eso lo van a votar. I'm not going to vote even by mail. So, they're going to throw that away. And, if the weather's bad, I don't know if I'm going to go vote. Listen, how dangerous is all of this that we're living right now? And what are some of the ways that we can begin to support Latinos who will have difficulty accessing the ballot box, people who are working, people who don't understand how to vote by mail, etc.? Who wants to go first? Whoever wants to jump in there.
I'll leave
Nelly,
the president of DAS to go. No, go ahead. You can go ahead, Secretary Padilla.
Alex, te están dando chance a hablar.
Okay. Every election is important, right? We say that all the time. And, we came into 2020 feeling that this would be the most consequential election of our lifetime. And that was before the impact of COVID. That was before the killing of George Floyd and the social justice movement that followed and everything else that we've been dealing with. And so I say that only to suggest that Nelly and I and our colleagues across the country, every election have to work towards both an accessible election and a secure election. And now on top of all that, one that's also safe from a public health perspective, given the COVID-19 pandemic. So I guess a couple top lines. Every state is a little bit different. So the recommendation or the advice for everybody is know the rules for your jurisdiction. Bottom line, make a plan. Vote early if you can. Vote by mail if you can. It is reliable. It is secure. Probably your safest option for this November. If you need to vote in person, go the first day the polls open. Don't leave it to the last day. The earlier, the better to protect you and election workers. But I will say a couple things about California. First, go to vote.ca.gov for all of our election tools and resources. Knowing that it is important to be secure, accessible, and safe, it's not an either-or option. California has chosen to send a ballot by mail to every active registered voter in the state, more than 21 million of us, because we do think it's the most convenient and the safest option for this November. But we have to back that up with the voter education campaign, because a lot of people, including a good chunk of the Latino voters, are not as familiar or not as comfortable with the vote by mail option, and they should be. We have added transparency, not just the safeguards for vote by mail, but a ballot tracking system even. You can track your ballot like you track your UPS package when you shop online, including confirmation alerts when your ballot has been received and counted. So ultimate confidence in vote by mail. But we have to work just as hard to make sure we maintain as many in-person options that are safe both on and before Election Day for people who need it, whether it's ballot replacement, language assistance, or for any other reason. So it's not an all vote by mail only election, even though that is the first recommendation because of fear of COVID.
But Vanita, not all the states are probably as advanced as Rhode Island and California. So in your opinion, what more can we do to make sure that Latinos get to the poll, that they understand that their vote does count, and that they don't need to be afraid of voting by mail? What are you seeing that's not being done that is, scaring maybe the daylights out of you and you're screaming, we need to do more of this?
Well, I think there's, some of what has come, unfortunately, from the administration and the president himself has created fears or suspicions about mail-in voting. And as Secretary Padilla said, in many places, it's going to be the safest form of voting. Many states have been using it for many, many years. There hasn't been a single scandal or problem, of note in those states like Colorado and Hawaii and Oregon and Washington State and other states. It's really important, though, that and this is something the Leadership Conference has been pushing, is that voters have options. We understand that not everyone is going to feel comfortable with mail-in voting. People with there may be language barriers to obtaining or feeling comfortable obtaining their absentee ballot. There may be cultural barriers. A lot of communities, immigrant communities, Black communities, don't feel comfortable. And so we have been pushing to make sure that voters have options. Pre-pandemic projections showed that Latinos were on pace to be the largest racial or ethnic minority group in the electorate, accounting for about 13% of eligible voters. And we need to make sure that, it's not just the Latino community, all of us need to make sure that we are understanding what rules are in place in your state. Go to vote.org. You can find out, you plug in your state. It tells you exactly whether you're registered, how your state allows for absentee ballots, when you can apply for them, how to fill it out, how to send it back. If you want to vote in person, as Secretary Padilla said, do it as early as possible, and get your information, though. Make your plan and be educated about this. Latino power in voting is really, really immense. And I will say, because I know there's so many young people on this call, the young people in the community are making the change. Millennials make up almost half of the Latino electorate in 2016, and now are even increasingly driving the growth in the Latino electorate. And so in any given year, you've got more and more people turning 18, and there's so much power in the community. We have to fight through the disinformation, make sure that all of you feel, and all of us feel, equipped to understand how to vote in this unprecedented election. Everything is at stake for our communities. The differences and the visions for America could not be more starkly presented. And voter suppression, and I'll close with this. Oftentimes people think of voter suppression as the impediments that are put between voters and voting. Voter suppression is also the active fear-mongering and dissuasion of people to participate at all. And we will fall prey to all of the messages where people are trying to erase us and erase our communities if we sit it out. So just make sure that you have the plan, that you're helping your families and friends have a plan as well, and exercise your right to vote and your voice.
Yeah, and I just want to add that.
Go ahead, Millie.
I just want to add that this election, in the middle of a pandemic, the silver lining is that we are now really publicizing the options that people have. That for the most part, only a few people have known that you could get a mail ballot, for example, in Rhode Island, or a few people have known that you could do emergency mail ballots. And now we have early in-person voting. We've got the day of, and we've got mail ballots or voting from home. And we're publicizing that. And so, if you had a situation where you couldn't find the time to go vote because you were juggling your family, your jobs, your parents, all these kinds of things, now you've got knowledge of all these ways in which you can choose one to then go vote. So making a plan is key. Inform that plan first by researching your own jurisdiction, because it's likely if you're in California, you've got a great website. If you're in Rhode Island, you've got another one, vote.ri.gov. If you can't find that your state has one, then you can go to vote.org, like Vanita said. But inform yourself and help inform the plans of your relatives and your neighbors. I am actually really hopeful that if we can counter the noise, the fear-mongering, as you were saying, Lori and Vanita, that this can be an unprecedented turnout for a Latino community because of the publicizing of all these options.
And I think there's two more things that if
Go
I
ahead.
can,
Go
Laura,
ahead.
just quickly, two more things that are critical. Aside from the access to the ballot, right, the various options, what the biggest challenge we're still dealing with is the general misinformation and disinformation campaigns that are intentionally trying to confuse voters through bad information. So just remind yourselves, remind all your family and friends, for official, reliable information, go to the source. Go to your local elections office. Go to your Secretary of State. Don't just believe everything that pops up in your Twitter feed. The other is, California has this reputation for it takes a long time to finish counting ballots every election. In part because we have such a big electorate, such a big population, but also because of the mechanics of ensuring the integrity of vote by mail. Right, we have to check the signatures as a measure against any voter fraud. And so with so many other states ramping up vote by mail for the first time in a presidential, states like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Ohio, and others, there's the likelihood that we don't know the results of the election on election night like we're used to seeing. If the race is too close to call in a lot of those key battlegrounds for days after the election, that's not the time to panic. That's the time to be patient, because it's a process at work. Ballots are being processed, counted, audited before we announce final results. So if there's somebody trying to claim victory in a very close election when there's still a lot of ballots to be counted, we got to trust the process and brace ourselves for that scenario.
And check that ballot up and down, because the down ballot races have a huge impact on your life.
Yeah.
We just had 4 more Latinos win in the primary here of various races in the General Assembly. And those are all young, new candidates. There's a huge opportunity to get a lot more people into the elected ranks.
Just wanted
And
to
I
add
want
a couple of
to
keywords. Sorry, Laurie. A couple of keywords that were mentioned to make the connection between information, education, empowerment, trust, and confidence. I think that's where we want to get to, because when we are empowered with trust and we have the confidence, everything will move the way it has to. So sometimes that chain is not going all together. So that's one of the many things that these amazing organizations like MALDEF and LULAC and NALEO and so many are doing, is like helping with that confidence and that trust and that empowerment, because that's one of the things we need. It's not enough just to be informed where you need to go. You need to have all the components and say, you know what, yes, this is my right, I can do this, and let me bring my family or my neighbors, and we're going to do this together. So let's not forget those things.
And one of the things that gives me hope, I don't know what you all feel, is that after the incident, the tragedy of George Floyd, for example, we saw so many young people come out, and they were actually driving the narrative in the Latino homes, challenging their own parents, challenging the way their parents think, which gives me the hope that they are going to show up this time around. Because they just, they're tired. They don't like what they're seeing. And they're also seeing that the possibility of them being also disengaged and left out of the process. Is that what you guys are feeling also and seeing?
Absolutely.
I
I'm certainly
think
seeing
here
it.
in Rhode Island, yes, definitely.
Yeah, I think we're seeing
Go
it
ahead,
not just in polling information and other research that's out there, but you hear it day in and day out. I mean, if you look at the faces of who was marching, protesting, demonstrating, it was a much more diverse group this go around than I think similar events in the past. And I think fundamentally, whether it's those young people, those emerging leaders and activists, or their parents, it's an affinity with the issues, right? Law enforcement, excessive force is not unique to the African American community. I think it's pointed there, but Latinos are no stranger to that. Being not having equal access to opportunity and the economy and education, we can certainly relate to that.
One thing I wanted to ask you all about is Afro-Latinos. I think I saw a statistic the other day that 1 in 4 or 1 in 5 Latinos identify as Afro-Latino. What can we do to engage them and bring them into the fold and give them, equal participation, and they become more visible? What can we, what has happened and what can we do?
I think that some of it is just taking advantage of their own perspectives. When I talk to some of my young Afro Latinos, I mean, they get the mix, right? They get the diversity of perspectives because of their unique position in our communities, and they can be great bridge builders and portals if given those leadership opportunities. So it's a matter of being actively involved and bringing them into the conversations to see what solutions they have.
And Mercedes, what do you think are some of the barriers that Afro Latinos have confronted and have not been able to advance, and they're not seen in leadership roles or just even represented in politics, for example?
I don't see a big difference, honestly, between, separating, I would say, more brown communities, because, for example, in the work that I do in financial literacy, there's not a big difference between the experience and the dynamics with African Americans and Latinos. I see almost the same thing. For example, 46% of Latinos are underserved, meaning unbanked or underbanked. Same thing goes for African American households as well. It's around 47, 48%. It's very close. And both are going through the same thing, suffering and using cash mostly, spending close to 9.5% of their income in fees of like check cashing centers and payday loans and pawn shops and all these things. So I wouldn't separate so much the two things, and I have experienced that in person when I have groups with African Americans and Latinos, and they're like, but you know what? We're going through the same thing. So we don't need to have very different strategies and groups and everything. I think in a way or another, it's very, very similar, the experience. So I would look into unifying and saying, okay, the force is bigger if we do this all together and identify the commonalities and not separate what are the differences that we have.
And actually, the history of civil rights in this country, and Vanita can speak more to that, is literally interconnected. I mean, we are so tied at the hip in terms of, where we've made advances. One group makes an advance like African Americans have, and then suddenly Latinos are able to advocate as well, built on that precedent. And I wish that more of our young people were taught that history, because it's something that, for me, made a big difference.
Though, I almost feel like our young people are ahead of this game from where we are, because when you look at I was at some of these protests in DC, and as Secretary Padilla was saying, it was amazing that, folks showing up. It was the most diverse set of protests I'd been to, multi-generational, multi-ethnic, it was crossing racial lines, multiracial. And in a lot of ways, I think we have to acknowledge that for Afro-Latinos, there's the additional kind of element of being perceived sometimes as neither Latino nor African-American, and then other times kind of bearing the burden of an additional kind of racial history in this country that African Americans uniquely have experienced, and understanding, as Secretary Gorbea said, that they can often actually really challenge all of our communities to do better, to be better, to recognize both the intersectionalities, but also some of the additional burdens and challenges that are met. But I feel like this really is a moment where our histories as immigrant communities and the Black communities has always been intertwined in the civil rights movement. And now more than ever, this is not about an election about one community versus another. This is an election that is very fundamentally about American values and what kind of country we want to be for the next 10, 15, 30 years. And I think there is a real moment for communities to be coming together to express solidarity for what that vision is. But we have to show up. And even if no candidate is the perfect solution or answer, we have to understand that up and down the ballot that these candidates are having a huge impact on our lives and on our communities in every which way, whether it's elections for district attorneys and judges at the local level, for secretaries of states that are determining what rules get set and how open and accessible our elections are or how they aren't, to senators and members of Congress and the president. And so this is no time to be a witness. I think often despair and cynicism is a luxury of the privileged. This notion that we can sit it out as communities of color is really troublesome. And I think that we have to really be mindful to support each other. As Secretary Padilla said, there is so much disinformation that wants us to sit it out. And we have to do everything we can. It's why we work with social media companies like Facebook and Twitter to push them to do more to protect the kind of information that voters are actually getting. But we have to be there for each other in this moment and to show up because everything literally is at stake.
Okay, so the questions are coming in fast and furious. I got to put on my glasses to read them. I'm so sorry. So I'm going to go, and I'm just going to formulate the 2 questions and say who they're for. So basically, I have Juanito who's asking, what is the best way for my Latino dollars impact my demographic? Does my credit card make that much of an impact? Mercedes, that will be for you. And for Mr. Padilla, it says, I'm in California. How can I help other parts of the country promote Latino voter education, voter awareness, etc.? Mercedes, go ahead.
What I would say is not so much your credit card is moving away from a cash economy that it's kind of invisible and it doesn't show exactly your buying power and what what the buying power that you bring to the country. And I think it's technology is, that's what we do is for people to feel comfortable and understand how to leverage technology, not only to save time and money, but also to be seen. So it's really important to use technology, lose the fear, learn more, and then just stop as much as you can doing things that are going to be invisible, like cash under the table, in terms of like nobody knows what how much I make or how much I'm spending and how much a buying power I have. And I'm sure everybody saw right now with the pandemic. You were at home with your family, close. How do you pay your bills? How do you buy things if you don't have a payment card or another means that it's not cash? What do you do with the check if you're sitting at home? And how do you go to a check cashing center or to a bank when we needed to be home? So it's get yourself educated, informed, and be seen. Be out there.
And
Alex?
if I can just add before moving on to the next question, Google 401k, Google IRA, Google FICO score, and know what they mean and why they're important. On the questions about voting, what can Californians do for efforts across the country? I mean, a lot of potential there through political parties, through political camp. A couple of organizations that have been mentioned already. Find out what NALEO is doing to help get out the count and to get out the census. There's a way to engage there if you'd like. Organizations like Voto Latino that are doing tremendous work organizing in the digital space and beyond. But I will also say this, and it's not mutually exclusive. You can be part of the efforts to phone bank out, text back out to other states. But in California, as with every state, election officials are in need of more poll workers, right, to provide the safe in-person opportunities to vote. A lot of the senior citizens and retirees that have helped in prior elections are not as available this November because of COVID. So in California, go to vote.ca.gov, scroll down to poll worker and sign up if you're willing to work as a poll worker. Across the country, you can go to powerthepolls.org and sign up there. So you can serve your democracy in addition to just being a voter.
Well,
This is a
and you
lot
can
of-
really be a part of history. And in Rhode Island, you can be as young as 16 or 17, as long as you're pre-registered and work as a poll worker. You earn a little bit of money doing so. It's a long day, but it's well worth the effort. You'll be able to say, I was there at ground level during this amazingly historic election.
Okay, next question. It says, and Vanita, I think I'm going to give this one to you. And it says here, I got two census forms, same address, but one with an apartment number and another, it says another one with with an apartment number. In other words, she got two census forms, the same address, but one with a different apartment number, and says, I filled out one and now I got a letter asking me to fill the second one. What should I do?
So the person who's asking this question, it's good they filled it out for the address that they got it for, and there's a phone number on every form that you get that you can use to just quickly report that they got a misaddressed envelope. They should not fill that one out. They should only be filling out the census form for the address where they are. And so, but they should report it. I think it's really helpful to the Bureau to know that an envelope was misdirected. If that apartment actually exists in that building, they should drop it off to the correct apartment as well and urge their neighbor to fill it out. That's doing double duty.
And Nelly, it says, how can Latinos in states where the communities are smaller get organized to increase voter participation? Thank you, Jose Sanchez, for your question.
Well, so despite what it might seem, Latinos, even when we're not in majority type positions, are able to really influence elections and also become candidates. A lot of our Latino candidates in Rhode Island are not representing majority Latino districts. And so I want to sort of put that idea out. You might be in a place like my good friend Michelle de la Isla is out in Kansas, Topeka, Kansas. She's the mayor of Topeka, Kansas. Who would know, right? Who would know that Secretary of State in a place like Rhode Island would be a Latino as well. So you can think about running for office yourself. In the context of this election, Secretary Padilla talked about sort of the texting tools and getting involved in a political campaign. I'm going to urge you to do it at a local level. Even if your candidate is not necessarily a Latino, by getting involved in a campaign, many of us got our first sort of understanding of how politics is run in your own jurisdiction. And so if there isn't a candidate who happens to be Latino but has the right ideals, those are good opportunities as well to volunteer and to help get the right people elected and into office.
There's a lot of people seem to be concerned with the census. I have another question here, and it says that how can a person who filled out the census, I imagine maybe online, it doesn't specify if it was online or if they mailed it in, but is there a way for them to verify that their information was received and that they're being counted? Is there a way to do that? Vanita, you want to go ahead
Sure. The Census Bureau actually tracks all of this in real time. In fact, every day they have a map that they're updating with who has filled out the census. If there's a real question, there's the phone number on the form or on their website, 2020census.gov, where you can call as a helpline to get assistance, and they can certainly call because they are literally updating it on a daily basis about which census forms they've received.
Perfect. And so, go ahead. Go ahead, Alex.
No, I was just going to add, it's a sort of a related question that I get oftentimes is, well, I hear they're starting to go door to door. There's only a couple weeks left. People who may be hesitant to open the door to a federal census worker. The best way to prevent a federal census worker from coming to your door for the census is to do it in advance. And so to remind people, if they still have that paper form, they can do it on paper. You can do it online for the first time, or you can do it by phone. Vanita mentioned the website earlier, my2020census.gov. It shows the listing there of all the various phone numbers and all the different languages that are accommodated for people who prefer a language other than English. So doing it in advance, whether you're worried about COVID or any other reason to not open your door to a federal employee, best way to eliminate that chance is to respond to the census right away.
And I've been telling a lot of people that this every person counted represents dollars into your community.
Mm-hmm.
And Mercedes is going, yes. Yes.
Oh, yes. Absolutely.
Big time. Mercedes, you know what? I have one last question for you. And that is, you know, a lot of what happens in our community is economic based. And so I wondered if you could just close us out with on this one question, and then I'm going to have you all wrap up. Believe it or not, our time is just fast going away. But how does upward economic mobility through financial education, inclusion, and empowerment of underserved communities really help with civic participation? And how do we get there?
Wow, how do we get there? That's a $1 million question, right? But not definitely. I think education can be a path out of poverty and a foundation for opportunity. So I believe very much in education, different kinds of campaigns and programs, because we need to work together to close the gaps that lead to inequality. So I think that's really, really important. Sometimes we might not think about it, but I think it's key, and it works all together. So I think the more I feel empowered with knowledge, the best I can manage my money, the more I can get out of being in an economy that is really bringing me all kinds of problems, because I'm wasting all this money and this time in doing things that I shouldn't be doing, because technology can help me with that. I think it takes me back to what I said about being empowered, being trusting, and having the confidence, because that's when I can stand up and say, I have a voice. I have the right to have a voice. I'm contributing to this country in so many ways, and just be out there and exercise my right to choose. I think it goes all connected from different perspectives, everybody here in the panel, but I think it all goes together.
This is going to lead to a whole different conversation for another day, but just capitalizing on what Mercedes just said, I think one of the things that we also have to empower our Latino families who own small businesses, and it's to get their children to understand why they just shouldn't turn their back on that business. And I think it's just about increasing our wealth. A lot of times those parents created those businesses, they paid for their child's education, college education, and then the children don't want to have anything to do with the business. And I think a lot of our economic, empowerment does go on to continue on with those small businesses. It's no small feat. That Latinos are the fastest growing, we're like the little engine that could creating small businesses. And so that's a conversation for another day. Don't worry, Gabe, I'm not going to go there. I'm going to let the panelists have a minute. I can just see Gabe grabbing his going where she's going with this. But no, I want to thank you all. But before I let you go, if you could give us all just, a 1 minute, what do we need to do? Where do we need to go? Let's not sabotage ourselves by inaction. So Vanita, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. If you could just give us some closing remarks, just a quick minute.
Go to vote.org, go to your Secretary of State's website and make a plan about how you're going to vote early, fill out the census. We need, though, all of you to get involved. I need you to urge all of you too to stay hopeful, because this is hope is something that will drive our action. And this is a moment where we need to stay hopeful and we need to take action. There are a lot of resources out there, and everything is at stake.
Mercedes?
I would just say, si se puede. And I think I have said what I believe, so I yield my time.
Go ahead, Nelly.
No, so bueno, this September is National Voter Registration Day month, because we want to make sure that in order to vote, you have to be registered. So please, please, please check your voter registration address. Make sure it's accurate so that if you're in California and Secretary Padilla sends you the ballot, he sends it to the right place. Or in my case, the ballot application. Accuracy in our voter list starts with you. Make sure that you're registered and that you're registered at the right address. And then make a plan, as Vanita and everybody else has said, and let's go forward into this election and really make our voices count through that ballot box. Pa'lante juntos es la única forma que vamos a hacer esto. And a special shout out to all my fellow Boricuas who've moved to places like Florida or even Rhode Island. You cannot sit this election out. You now have the ability to vote in the presidential election. Make sure you're registered, make sure you vote. It's going to matter a lot.
Mr. Padilla, usted tiene la última
Thank you.
palabra.
Well, I'll echo the si se puede and add a democracy is not a spectator sport, right? It's all hands on deck time, both for the census and for the November election. And just think about this. If we did not have power through being counted in the census, or if we did not have power through casting our ballots in, why are so many people working so hard to take that opportunity away from us, right? The people who don't want us to be counted. So let's overcome that through engagement and participation. People who are trying to make it harder for us to cast our ballots at the ballot box, let's overcome that through engagement and participation, because it's through that that we'll achieve that more inclusive democracy and the more inclusive economy and set the stage for a much better American dream for all families in this country.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Padilla, Nelly Gorbea, Mercedes Garcia, Vanita Gupta. Thank you all so very much for joining us. So much important information. I think it's clear we can't sit it out. We have to stay hopeful, make a plan, and not let fear paralyze us. Let's just not, think that we can sit this out. It's just not the proper thing to do. We all have something that we can contribute, and we're all capable of doing it. Just talk to our neighbors and just talk to our friends. Just by talking to one person, you're able to make a difference. Thank you for joining us today. And we have much more coming up on the CHCI conference 2020 this year. You can stay tuned to our next panel that begins promptly at 1:30 p.m. It's called Leadership in Crisis, Public Partnership for Social Good. Thank you for joining us. Abrazos para todos. Ciao.